Here we go. We're going to celebrate Yom Teruah today. And again, Leviticus 23, verses 23 through 25 lays out for us this particular set-apart appointment day. And it says this, again, Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, on the 1st of the month, you shall have a rest, a remembrance by blowing or shouting, a set-apart assembly. You shall do no laborious work, but you shall present an offering by fire to Yahweh." And so this is a set-apart day, and all works of labor or works of service are shut down on this day. Do no laborious work. There are two words there in the Hebrew that emphasize the fact that none of our regular work is to be done. However, the priests performed work all day on the Sabbath and all of the appointed days. That was a different kind of work. That's not a forbidden work. It's the work of redemption that they were accomplishing. Just as our Messiah said, "I am working unto this day and will continue to work, just as my Father works." And that was a Sabbath day that he spoke those things. He was alluding to the fact that our own works, the work of making a living, are the things that are to be ceased from on the Sabbath day and on these appointed days. But the work of redemption continues on 7 days a week, because the Father does not stop working. He does not sleep or slumber like all the rest of us need to do from every so often, like every night. But he doesn't sleep, and he doesn't rest from the work of redemption. He's always watching over us. He's always looking out for our best interest. He's always fighting the enemy on our behalf, or he's rebuking the enemy, as it were. He doesn't really have to fight. He's the more powerful, obviously, because the enemy is a created being.
That's right.
But he is the eternal. And so he's always at work doing those things that are working out our salvation as we partner with him to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling. So we're going to look at a couple of these words, the words that are underlined here in the text. Rest, remembrance, and blowing. These are the three words, and then Miqra Kodesh, set-apart assembly. And here they are. The vocabulary. Okay, here we go. Shabbaton, translated in our text, rest. It usually means a complete rest or a cessation in observance, I suppose. I guess that's a possible interpretation of that. But Shabbaton, from the word Shabbat, which means to cease or to desist. So a Shabbaton, it's a different word, and it's used a little bit differently than the word Shabbat. Shabbaton has a particular flavor to it. It means a complete cessation. And the word Shabbaton, I think we're going to see that let me jump ahead real quick. Yeah, we're gonna look at that. Let's look at it right now. The word Shabbaton. The first day of the 7th month is to be a Shabbaton, which is a complete cessation from labor. The word Shabbaton is found in the Torah and is used of the Sabbath day. This is important because we're going to clarify which days are complete rest and which days are just rest from your normal labor. Okay? The Shabbaton is used in the scriptures of the Sabbath day, the 7th-day Sabbath, also the Day of Trumpets, which is today, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles, the 1st and the 8th day of Tabernacles. Shabbaton is also used with reference to the sabbatical year, every 7th year in a cycle of years, and also to the year of Jubilee, the 50th year. And so this word Shabbaton is used. What it means for the Sabbath year, the sabbatical year, and the year of Jubilee, it means the land is supposed to rest on those years. A complete rest. You don't plow, you don't sow, you don't harvest, you just leave it alone, just as it is. You don't touch the land, and you let it rest. And that's what Shabbaton means, a complete cessation. So the Sabbath day, we're to have a complete rest. And the reason I'm making a deal about this is because there are a couple of appointment days where the word Shabbaton is not used of them. And that would be the first day of unleavened bread, the seventh day of unleavened bread, and also Shabbaton is not used of the feast of Shavuot or Pentecost. We read in Exodus chapter 16. Exodus chapter 12, it gives us instructions about Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And it says that no work is to be done except to prepare your food on those days. The first day of unleavened bread and the seventh day of unleavened bread. You're allowed to finish cooking the lamb because we slaughtered it in the afternoon on the 14th day of the first month. And then we roasted it over the fire. We weren't allowed to cut it up and, slice and dice it. We were to roast that lamb as a whole over the fire, and it takes hours. I don't know if anyone's ever done that, but it takes hours, sometimes 3, 4, even 5 hours to roast a lamb all the way through, to cook it all the way to the inside if you don't cut it open. Like if we were to fillet it, it'd be 20 minutes, a half hour at most. We could cook it up and eat it, but we're to roast that lamb whole. And so the roasting of that lamb took place into the evening and into the night, which is technically the 15th day of the month, or the first day of unleavened bread. So Father gave us these instructions that these days are to be a complete day of rest, except that you could prepare your food, because he knew that we would be roasting those lambs. And it wouldn't be done by sunset. We had to, keep cooking it. So there are a couple of appointed days where cooking is permissible, the first and seventh day of unleavened bread. But on the rest of the Shabbaton, the days that are called Shabbaton are complete rests. No preparation of food is to be done on those days. The preparation is to be done the day before. Okay, so they're complete rests. And why is that? Why do they need to be complete rests? Because he wants us to focus on him and not on cooking our food or whatever, any of the other work that we would do the other 6 days. He wants us to focus on the work that he's performing on our behalf and to be fully paying attention to his presence and what he's doing for us and what he's telling us on those days. Okay, so that's the word Shabbaton, and that's the first word of our text, again, that reads this way: the first of the month you shall have a rest. That's the Shabbaton. And then also a remembrance by blowing or shouting. And the word there is zikron, the word for memorial or remembrance. We're to remember something on this day. We're to remember something, and we're going to look at what that something is that we're supposed to remember. Zikron, from the word zakar, to remember. The scriptures speak of the Father remembering what he promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And when he remembers what he made a promise about, that's usually a signal that he's about to fulfill his words. He's about to perform a redemptive act on behalf of his people in keeping with his promise. So zikron means that. It means to remember. It means he remembers, and it means that we're to remember something too. And what is that something? Well, we're going to get to that in a second, but let's look at the word Teruah from Yom Teruah. Teruah means a shout or a blast of war, an alarm, or a shout of joy, or a trumpet blast. The word trumpet isn't in the word Teruah. The word Teruah just means shout. But it implies by some other scriptures that we bring into play here, the Teruah can be a shout of the voice. It can be a shout of a trumpet. It's a war cry. And so let's look at, Miqra could ask, let me look at this real quick because we already know this one. A Miqra Kodesh is a set-apart or holy assembly, a convocation, a convoking, that means a coming together, and a reading or a proclamation. And when we come together to proclaim these things, according to Leviticus 23, verses 1 through 3, we are to proclaim these festivals. We are to proclaim these set-apart days. And the proclamation is the telling of what this day is all about and why Yahweh has set this as an appointment day. In other words, we're to elaborate on the meaning of this particular set-apart day and every other set-apart day and what Father wants to do for us. So that's the proclamation aspect, and that's what the gospel is. The gospel, the eternal gospel, is a proclamation of what the Father is doing on our behalf. And it's been, over the centuries and throughout the history of the human race, the gospel has been developed not in the sense that it's changing, but in the sense that Father is revealing more and more about how he's going to bring about the redemption and how he's going to bring about the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and how he's going to bring mankind back to the garden again, like we've talked about before. So that's what the proclamation, that's what good news is, and that's what we're to be proclaiming on this day. This is good news. This is part of the eternal gospel, the good news that Paul spoke of, that Yahushua spoke of, all the prophets and John the Baptist, and everyone else who had anything to say about it. This is the plan and the information that is being proclaimed and announced to the world. Okay, so let's talk about Teruah. Remembrance. Okay, the remembrance. What is it that we're supposed to remember with the blowing and with the shouting? And I would suggest maybe a couple of things. The first thing that always comes to my mind is that in the third month, there was an event that took place after Israel came out of Egypt. In the third month, it says that they arrived in the region of Sinai. And the Father gave instructions, and he said, prepare yourselves because I'm going to come down on the mountain and I'm going to speak to the people. And so it says in Shemot, or Exodus chapter 19, it says this, and on the third day in the morning, there was thunder and lightning and a dense cloud in the mountain and the sound of a very loud horn or trumpet. All the people who were in the camp trembled. And Moshe brought the people out of the camp to meet Elohim, and they took their place at the lower end of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was completely covered with smoke because Yahweh had descended on it in fire. And its smoke went up like the smoke of a great furnace. And the whole mountain shook greatly. When the sound of the horn grew louder and louder, Moshe was speaking and Elohim was answering him with a voice. And Yahweh came down on Mount Sinai, on the top of the mountain, and Yahweh summoned Moshe to the top of the mountain, and Moshe went up. And so this sounding, this remembering with the blowing, with the shouting, was to be a reminder or a memorial of this day when Father came down on the mountain and met and spoke with the people of Israel. In other words, it's the presence and the appearing of our great God, our great Elohim, that the trumpet announces. And so this blowing of the trumpet on Yom Teruah is to be a reminder of that event, that God came down to be with his people and to speak, communicate, and fellowship with his people. Now, the book of Hebrews tells us this about that event. Hebrews chapter 12, it says, the writer says, for you have not drawn near to a mountain touched and scorched with fire. He's speaking to the believers in Yahushua. You've not drawn near to a mountain touched and scorched with fire, and to blackness and darkness and storm, and a sound of a trumpet and a voice of words, so that those who heard it begged that no further word should be spoken to them, for they could not bear what was commanded, which was, even if a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned or shot through with an arrow. And so fearsome was the sight that Moshe said, I exceedingly fear and tremble. So it was a frightening thing. It was fearful. And when Father commands us in the scriptures to fear Elohim and keep his commandments, a little piece of this should come to mind. Fearing, I mean, the people literally were terrified at the presence of the Almighty because he's so awesome. So a little bit of that fear, of course there's reverence and there's respect, but fear actually means a trembling, as it were. That we need to understand that he's so awesome that we don't just approach him, at our whim. We can't approach him just any old way. He's awesome and he's great and scary. Okay, can I use that word, scary? Hallelujah. So even Moses, who had appeared in his presence at this moment in time, was shaking in his boots. Okay, exceedingly fear and tremble. So this is part of probably the main part of what we're supposed to remember on Yom Teruah, is the appearing of the Almighty to his people, the coming down from heaven to his people, which is, of course, prophetically significant because that's what we're going to see happen in the future with our Master who's going to come down from heaven. The great Elohim is going to appear before us. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about the word teruah some more. The primary meaning of the Hebrew word teruah is to raise a noise by shouting or with an instrument, especially a horn. Numbers 10:7. You know what? Let's look up these references. Numbers 10:7. Adrian, look up Joshua 6:5.
Okay.
Matthew, look up 1 Samuel 4:5. Who else wants to look up a verse?
Sure.
Rob, Psalm 45:7. And who wants to take 1 Samuel 10:24? Anybody? Emmer? 1 Samuel 10:24. So let me do Numbers as we look at this word teruah. Numbers 10:7. Let me find it real quick. The Midbar. The Midbar means in the wilderness, and that's the Hebrew word for the book of Numbers, the Midbar. Numbers 10:7. And when the assembly is about to be assembled, you blow, but you do not shout. These are instructions about how to use the trumpets in the camp of Israel as they were out in the wilderness. He says, when the assembly is to be assembled, you blow. That means, but you do not shout. You blow, but you do not shout. So there's different tones of the trumpet, and one of them obviously is just to blow it, and one's to shout it. And I guess there might be some other ways, some other signals in the way that the horn was blown to indicate, assembling or to pull up camp or to set down camp or whatever. So there were different signals. So the horn was a noise that was raised in order to accomplish a certain instruction. Or the traditional ram's horn, the shofar, which is in Joshua 6:5. Go ahead.
And it shall be when they make a long blast with the horn of a yobel.
Hang on a minute, hang on.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Joshua 6:5, it says, and it shall be when they make a long blast with the horn of a yobel, or a ram's horn, and when you hear the voice of a shofar, that all of the people shout with a great sound, and the wall of the city shall fall down flat, and the people shall go up every man straight before him.
Hallelujah. So that was the story of Joshua conquering the city of Jericho. Yeah. So the shofar was used then, and it referred to the shout of the people. Okay. Not the word shofar. Teruah. It was the word teruah there was the shout of the people. It's also used in this sense in rituals of the Israelite tabernacle, 1 Samuel 4:5. 1 Samuel 4:5.
And when the Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh came into the camp, all Israel shouted with a great shout, so that the earth rang again.
Hallelujah. The people shouted. It was a rejoicing kind of a shout, wasn't it? when the tabernacle came in. It's also used to describe the exaltation of the people of Israel when the Ark of the Covenant was brought to the camp, and that's what we just read. Later in Israel's history, in the first Commonwealth, so-called, the same root is used to describe the exaltation of the people when David brings the Ark to Jerusalem. Same idea. The people shouted and rejoiced over the fact that the Ark was coming into Jerusalem. The poetic description of this in the Psalms, of this is in the Psalms. Go ahead and with Psalm 45:7.
You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, Yahuwah, our Elohim, has anointed you with the oil of joy above your fellows.
Hallelujah. And also the glorification of the king and his enthronement. 1 Samuel 10:24.
Then Shemuel took the vial of oil and poured it on his head and kissed him and said, "It isn't that the Lord anointed you to be prince over..." Oh, I'm sorry. I lost my place. Let me get back to 24. Shemuel said to all the people, You see him who Jehovah has chosen, that there is none like him among all the people. All the people shouted, "Long live the king."
Hallelujah. That was a teruah. They shouted. Okay, so this word teruah then is used in these various ways, particularly of the shout of our voice in praise, and also the shouting of a ram's horn or shofar. So when we refer to this day as the Day of Trumpets, technically it's the day of the shout, okay? But the shouting includes the blowing of the shouting of the trumpet. So we're not really wrong when we say that, and I'm not going to make a big deal about it. Fine, let's call it the Day of Trumpets, that's fine. But it really is a reference to shout. Now, you may hear somebody complain that we shouldn't call this the Day of Trumpet for this very reason, because teruah means shout, but it's really also talking about the shout of a ram's horn, so it's okay. Don't worry about that. We can still call it the Day of Trumpets anyway. So here's another reference to the word teruah, and it's Bamidbar, or Numbers, in the wilderness, chapter 10, verses 5 to 10. When you blow an alarm, that is teruah, when you teruah an alarm, then the camps that are located on the east parts must begin to travel. And when you blow the alarm or teruah it the second time, then the camps that are located on the south side must begin to travel. An alarm, a teruah, must be sounded for their journeys. But when you assemble the community, you must blow, but you must not sound an alarm. The sons of Aaron, the priests, must blow the trumpets, and they will be to you for an eternal right ruling throughout your generations. Okay, so the trumpet was used, again, as I mentioned, to send signals for leaving camp, and for this group to leave camp, and then for this group to follow. And so you had these various tones and ways of blowing the shofar that meant different things. Another way that it was blown was as an alarm, as a war cry. And I don't know if I have a reference for that or not. Oh yeah, here it is. Bamidbar, Numbers 10, verses 5 through 10. Hope I have that reference right. If you go to war in your land against the adversary who opposes you, then you must sound an alarm with the trumpets, and you will be remembered. There's that word remembered again. You will be remembered before Yahweh your Elohim, and you will be saved from your enemies. Because Yahweh will remember. He will hear that trumpet sound, that war alarm, and he will come in response to that. And remember his promise. He's going to come on behalf of his people and fight for them. Also in the time of your rejoicing, such as in your appointed festivals or at the beginnings of your months, You must blow with your trumpets over your burnt offerings and over the sacrifices of your peace offerings, that they may become a memorial. There's the word again, a memorial for you before your Elohim. I am Yahweh, your Elohim. So Yahweh hears the alarms, the blowing of the trumpet, and he responds accordingly to whatever our need is. And then this is the Jericho one. I think, Adrian, you already read this one, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you hear the signal from the ram's horn, have the whole army give a loud battle cry, a shout, and then the city wall will collapse and the warriors should charge straight ahead. So the ram's horn sounded, and this is the fulfillment of it in verse 20. The ram's horn sounded, and when the army heard the signal, they gave a loud shout, and the wall collapsed, and the warriors charged straight ahead into the city and captured it. So all of these things are things that the Israelites would remember when they hear the sound of the shout on Yom Teruah. They would remember how Father took care of them throughout their wilderness wanderings and all the different tones that the ram's horn made, and the silver trumpets too. Where'd those silver trumpets go? Oh, there's one. The silver trumpet had a particular use, and we'll read about that sometime. But they remembered these things, and the sound of the shout on Yom Teruah was a reminder of how Father took care of his people and responded. He remembered his promises to his people and responded to whatever their need was, as well as to Shavuot, which was, the blowing of the trumpet that day was a trumpet from heaven, and it was very loud, and they were remembering on this day when we blow the trumpets again and when we shout again how Father came down to meet with his people. So all of these things are to be remembered on this day. The Father takes care of his people, doesn't he? But we got to be doing the things that he commanded us to do. Because if Israel hadn't used the shofar and blown those horns in the fashion that they were instructed, how would Father know what to do for them? Of course, Father sees all, and he would have known. But it was in response to their alarms and their trumpet shouts and the different tones that were blown that Father knew what they were asking for. And so it is with us that when we are obeying his instructions and we're calling out on his name to come and rescue us in the manner that he has instructed us to do so, he remembers us. He remembers his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their seed after them, which is us. We talked about that, right? We're their seed. We're Abraham's seed, according to Paul in Ephesians and Galatians and the book of Romans. We are that seed, and we are the heirs according to the promise. So we need to remember these things on Yom Teruah, and that's part of the remembering with the shouting. Here's another one, I guess. Teruah in the Psalms. Now I will triumph over my enemies who surround me. I will offer sacrifices in his dwelling place and shout for joy. I will sing praises to Yahweh. Blessed are the people who know the shout of Yahweh. In the light of your face they walk. And again, Psalm 150. Praise him with loud cymbals. Praise him with clanging cymbals. Literally the buzzing of the shout in the Hebrew. The clanging cymbals, the buzzing of the shout. The Teruah. Hallelujah. So the music we make with horns when we're praising him are also a shouting of sorts. We're shouting out to him and rejoicing before him. And then Teruah in the year of Jubilee, you must sound the loud horn blasts. The Teruah of the horn in the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, at the Day of Atonement. Okay, and then it also talks about you must consecrate the 50th year and must proclaim a release in the land. And you do the same by blowing the shofar. So what do the prophets say about the regathering of Israel? Now we're going to switch gears and we're going to bring it back around and show the significance of what we're doing today in the shouting and the blowing of the shofar with the prophetic nature of Messiah's coming and the events that are surrounded by the blowing of this shofar. Shalom, my friends. Welcome. Miqra. In that day, this is Isaiah chapter 27. In that day, Yahweh will thresh from the flowing Euphrates to the wadi of Mitzrayim, and you, O sons of Israel, will be gathered up one by one. So this is the prophesied regathering of the scattered house of Israel and the scattered house of Judah. The prophets all speak about this gathering, about this day, when Father, because of a people in a late generation, and I would suggest that that's us, we're of this later generation, when we repent of our transgressions and of our rebellion against His will and His commandments, the Father has promised that generation that repents and returns to the ancient paths, returns to obedience to His commandments, because that's what He's wanted all these centuries and even thousands of years. He's just wanted a people who would listen to His voice and obey Him and be His people so that He could be a true Elohim to us. And so when this generation of people do this and we repent, then He's going to remember us, He's going to remember His promises, and He's going to gather us up one by one, and in that day a great trumpet will sound. And so there's the signal that is prophetic in nature. In that day a great trumpet will sound, and those who are perishing in Assyria and those who are exiled in Mitzrayim or Egypt will come and worship Yahweh on the holy mountain in Jerusalem. So again, it's all signaled by this blowing, this shouting of the great trumpet. In the New Testament, there's an interesting word that is used about our gathering together in reference to verse 12 here in Isaiah 27, where it says, "You, sons of Israel, will be gathered up one by one." And Paul talks about this in 2 Thessalonians 2:1. He begins to write this exhortation to the Thessalonians concerning the coming of our Master, Yahushua Messiah, and our being gathered to Him. So it's in reference to that time that Yahushua Himself talked about in Matthew 24 and Luke 21, where after a great tribulation time, that He would return on the clouds, and with a great sound of a trumpet, He would gather His people, the elect from the four corners of the earth. And so Paul talks about that. He says, "Are being gathered together." But the word is also used in Hebrews 10:25, the same Greek word, episynagoge, meaning gathered. In this exhortation, let us not forsake our gathering together, as some are in the habit of doing, but let us encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. So our gathering together on these appointed times, on the Sabbath days and the special annual appointed times, are a gathering together that is prophetic in nature. It's with a view to that day in mind and in view. That day when He returns and He gathers all of His elect from who are scattered across the world. So that's what our gathering is about. It's about our gathering into the presence of our Father in heaven at the appointed time when He calls us to do so. Because there are days when He doesn't call us to assembly, and He isn't planning on meeting with us, but there are these special times when He does appoint a time to meet with us. And so our gathering together on the Sabbath day and on these special days, we're not supposed to forsake, because what we're doing is we're living out by practicing coming together in holy assembly, in Miqra Kodesh on these days. We're rehearsing that time when we're going to come together as a family and as a body of Messiah, and coming together into His presence and to meet with Him. Hallelujah. So Hebrews 10:25 may never be the same to you again. I hope, because we have to understand that, why we shouldn't forsake our gathering together. In other words, we shouldn't put other activities and things ahead of what he's instructed us to do, because what he's instructed us to do in the assembly of saints is a rehearsal of what is going to take place in that great day. The appearance of Yahweh in Joel, the prophet, he says, blow the trumpet in Zion, sound the alarm signal on my set-apart mountain, and let all the inhabitants of the land shake with fear, for the day of Yahweh is about to come. Indeed, it is near. It will be a day of dreadful darkness, a day of foreboding storm clouds like blackness spread over the mountains. And remember, I said that in the beginning of our service, I said that it's not when Yahushua comes down on the cloud, it's not going to be like we sometimes depict, and it's not going to be all hugs and kisses, as it were, okay? That's not what it's about. He's coming down in darkness. It's a day of dread for the rest of the world. It's a day of rejoicing, but also of fear for us, because we're finally standing before that one who's going to be judge, and the one that we have to answer to for either listening to his voice or not listening to his voice. And so it's going to be a fearful event, just as Sinai was a fearful event. It is a huge and powerful army. There has never been anything like it ever before, and there will not be anything like it for many generations to come. When we're all gathered together, we're going to be a huge army, but it's going to be a sobering event. Let's put it that way. The appearance of Yahweh is spoken of in Zechariah 9. It says, then Yahweh will appear over them. His arrow will flash like lightning. Remember, he talked about, don't listen to these voices that say he's over in the secret place or he's over there. He said, as the lightning flashes across the sky, so it will be when the Son of Man appears. And then you're going to know it's him, when it's like lightning. And so Zechariah, and I think that Yahushua is alluding to Zechariah's prophecy, Yahweh will appear over them, his arrow will flash like lightning. Okay? Adonai, the Lord Yahweh, will sound the trumpet, and he will march in the storms of the south. And Adonai, the Lord Yahweh, will shield them. He's going to protect his people in that day. How do we know that Yom Teruah corresponds to the return of Messiah to usher in the Messianic age? Well, we've already seen a couple of little things about with the trumpet, with the gathering, and number one I listed here, the prophetic nature of the annual appointed times as shadow pictures of the redemptive acts of Messiah. So the appointed times not only was a remembrance of things that Father had already accomplished on behalf of his people, but they were prophetic shadow pictures. They were rehearsals. That's really a good word to use there. They're rehearsals of what is to come. So when we put these things into practice and we're honoring Father by keeping these instructions and meeting on these days and keeping this day holy, set apart, then we're practicing for that day, and we're going to be ready for that day when he appears. And we're going to know what to do. We're going to know whose people we are, and he's going to recognize us and know us because we've been putting these things into practice. The return of Messiah is the next major event in the redemption, and Yom Teruah is the next appointed time that has not yet found fulfillment. We saw the spring appointed times all found fulfillment when Messiah came the first time. The Passover, the setting apart through, the unleavened bread, meaning the separation or the setting us free from sin and man-made religious practices. And also Shavuot or Pentecost, which was when he sent his Holy Spirit to dwell within us, to help us to do the things that he instructed his disciples to do. But Yom Teruah, the first day of the 7th month, hasn't yet found a fulfillment, and it's the next appointed day on the calendar. And so putting 2 and 2 together, the return of Messiah is the next big event. Yom Teruah is the next big appointment day, and it all coincides. It all fits together like hand and glove, because of the trumpet and the gathering and all those things that we've spoken of. And then the gap in time. Number 3, how do we know? The gap in time between the spring and the fall feasts is kind of a picture or an indication that there's going to be a gap in time between Messiah's first coming and his second coming. And then, of course, the terminology. We talked about a few of those already. Episynagoge, gathering, the sounding of the shofar. And so this is what the Master said in Matthew 24 regarding his coming. He says, "For as lightning that comes from the east is visible even in the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever there is a carcass, there the vultures will gather. Immediately after the distress or tribulation of those days," hint, hint, this is a timeline indicator, come from the mouth of the Master himself, and not a man-made interpretation. If I can try to soften that a little bit, what I'm trying to do is I want you to see, I want us all to see that what the Master Yahusha spoke was authoritative and ought to be the groundwork for all other interpretation of prophetic statements in the New Testament. He said, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the sky and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. At that time, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. And I've thought a lot about what would the sign of the Son of Man be that appears in the sky. The only thing that comes to mind is the sighting of the sliver of the new moon. That's a sign in the sky. It's also indicates a new month, the first day of a new month, which is what Yom Teruah is based on. It's the first day of the 7th month. And so I wonder, and I'm not saying this definitively, but it's possible that the sign that appears in the sky is the sliver of the new moon. And all the nations of the earth will mourn because they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call. There's the shout. And they will gather his elect from the 4 winds, from one end of the heavens to the other, in fulfillment of the prophecies made by all of the prophets. And so they have a couple of things come together in this summary by the Master about his coming. You have the possible appearing of the sliver of the new moon, and the actual seeing of the Son of Man coming down on the cloud. And then he sends out his angels with the loud trumpet call. Paul's version of the story, and this is why I say we need to interpret all the rest of the New Testament prophetic statements in view of what the Master authoritatively taught. Matthew 24 and Luke 13 and Luke 21. They're both little bits and pieces of what was covered in Matthew 24. So Paul says this according to the Master's own word. And this is why I'm saying that Paul is reiterating what the Master himself said. It was his own word regarding his coming and regarding the timing of that event. According to the Master's own word, we tell you that we who are still alive, who are left till the coming of the Master, will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. For the Master himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, there's the shout, with the voice of the archangel and with the trumpet call of Elohim, and the dead in Messiah will rise first. And after that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with him in the clouds to meet the Master in the air. And so we will be with Yahweh, or this might read the Master, the Master Yahusha. So we will be with him forever. And I know that that's a doctrine and a debate that's been going on for many years in the churches, in all the places that we've all come out of. The timing, the rapture, when does it occur, pre, mid, post? Are you premillennial, are you postmillennial, are you amillennial, and all those different things that people debate. But I want to suggest that it's the Master's own word that we need to be heeding to, and we need to be understanding the timing of these events, because it's the Master told his disciples when these things would occur, when he would come down, and when he would gather his people. And it seemed to be very clear when you read it in Matthew 24. But I know that a lot of theology wants to separate the statements by the Master and the statements by Paul into two different comings, or two different stages of his coming, or whatever. But I have another really long teaching that I couldn't really cover today that goes into a lot of detail about comparing what the Master said in Matthew 24 and what Paul says here in 1 Thessalonians 4 and chapter 5 and 2 Thessalonians 2, to really show that Paul is really talking about what the Master said, again, according to the Master's own word, is Paul's teaching. And it has to be that way, because if Paul is not teaching according to the Master's word, then he's a false prophet. He has to come into agreement. And the Master, Yahusha, has to agree with the Torah, or he's a false prophet. In other words, there's a pattern that emerges, and that is, Father has spoken, he's given instructions, and all the prophets, if they're true prophets, are going to agree with what the Father spoke. That the law is eternal, that the law is a blessing, that we should rejoice at his word, as one of Laura's songs says. And so any prophet that speaks against those words and introduces a new God, a new way of worshiping God, they're false prophets. And so we have to put to the test even the Master himself, Yahusha, or Jesus. Did he comply with the Father's will as the Father spoke it? And how should we understand what he was teaching to us? And so when we work all that out, we come to realize that Yahusha didn't do away with his Father's word or his law, that he was always in compliance with his Father's word. And he said so. He said that I only do what the Father tells me to do. And then all the New Testament prophets, including Paul, have to come into agreement with those same things. They can't be teaching a new doctrine. They can't be teaching a new way, a new religion, or a new love, or redefining things. They have to, all the true prophets have to come in alignment with what the Father said and what the Son said. And so that's how we know that according to the Master's authoritative word, which was given in Matthew 24, the rapture of the church is post-tribulational. There, I just let it out, okay? It comes after the tribulation, because the Master said that that's when it was going to occur.
Yes.
He would come down with the trumpet and gather his elect. Hallelujah. So maybe you just saved me 2 weeks of teaching. So but I'm going to do it anyway someday.
I agree with you.
Hallelujah. So that's Paul's version of the story. And about the dead and the living, Paul talked here about the dead in Messiah would rise first, and then the living would be caught up. And in another place, in 1 Corinthians 15, he talks about the change. Their bodies would be changed or transformed. And this is all a part of the redemption. Remember we talked last week about the redemption that was coming? The redemption of our bodies? From Ephesians chapter 1, I think it was. It's all referring to this event, that when the Messiah returns, he's going to raise the dead, those who are dead in Christ, and he's going to change or transform all the living believers. And the Messiah talked about that in the episode of the raising of Lazarus, when he was talking to Martha. Martha said to Yahusha, Master, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now Elohim will give you whatever you ask. And Yahusha said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. And Yahusha said to her, and here's the key statement, I am the resurrection and the life. And those are those two things that Paul talked about that occur when he returns. There's going to be a resurrection, and there's going to be the transforming of the living. He's the resurrection and he's the life. He gives life to the dead, and he gives a transformed life to the living at his coming. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies. Those are the dead in Christ. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die, because they'll be transformed. Do you believe this? Do you believe this?
Yes.
I do. Hallelujah. So he is the resurrection and the life. And that event is going to be transformational for all of us. Whether we've died before that happens or whether we're still alive. It's going to be a fearful event, a big deal. It's going to be life-changing. And I'm looking forward to it. And so on this final point, we're going to end my official study, and then we're going to take questions and comments and testimonies and things like that. Where the Messiah said in Matthew 24, no one knows about that day or hour, and not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. So what did he mean by that? And it's usually interpreted as, we can't possibly know the day when he's coming, even though that's what the appointments are all about. And Father gave a revelation of these things through the appointments, through the shadow pictures of these things that we're supposed to come together and rehearse every seventh day of the week and every time that they occur during the year. So what gives? Is it possible to know the time of his coming or not? What did Yahusha, more importantly, what did Yahusha mean when he made this statement? And as I brought this teaching before, when we were doing a summary of the appointed times, understand that the Master taught in parables. It's important to realize that, because not everything that he spoke is supposed to be literally interpreted. But it's figurative, it's metaphorical, it's parable. In other words, even symbolic might be a way of describing it. He was teaching things in a way that unbelievers would be thrown off in their understanding of what he was saying, but his disciples who knew the key to understanding how to interpret parables would understand what he was talking about. Okay? So the teaching in parables leads us to this idea that the day of Yom Teruah is determined by the sighting of the moon. It's not known ahead of time. In other words, nobody knows what day it's going to be until we sight the moon, the first sliver of the new moon in the 7th month. And so the day is a hidden day in the sense that you don't know which day it's going to be. And I would suggest that that's probably what the Master was alluding to when he said no one knows the day or the hour. Not the Son, not the angels, nobody knows, but only the Father. Because we won't know until it occurs. And then we're going to, that's why we're told to watch and wait. It's because we're supposed to be watching for these things that he gave us signs to indicate, right? We're supposed to be watching. And so no one knows when it is going to occur until the new moon actually shows up. And so the Master was likely telling his disciples the day of his coming in this hidden or parabolic way. If the disciples understood this concept that Yom Teruah is a hidden day, it's a day that no one knows until it occurs, then they would understand that the Master was not actually concealing. He was not indicating a concealing of the day of his coming, but he was actually indicating exactly what day that was going to be, which is the opposite of the common misinterpretation of his words. So Paul also talks about how that this day does not have to be hidden from those who are watching and waiting. In 1 Thessalonians 5, on the topic, Paul says, of times and seasons, brothers and sisters, you have no need for anything to be written to you, for you know quite well that the day of Yahusha will come in the same way as a thief in the night. And isn't that what the Master taught? He gave that thief in the night metaphor about those who who were waiting but weren't really watching for the master to return. And so they began to beat their fellow servants and to abuse their authority that they were given. And then the master returns at a time when they're not expecting, and they're assigned a portion with the unbelievers, and where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. So Paul says, now when they are saying there is peace and safety, and then sudden destruction comes on them, like labor pains on a pregnant woman, and they will surely not escape. So the exhortation that the master gives in Matthew 24, and also Paul gives here, is to be aware of this thief in the night. That if you're not watching, and we usually aren't watching for a thief in the night, and that's why he can break in. But if we're aware of when he would come, then we could be watching and waiting and not allow our house to be broken into. And so it is when Messiah comes that if we're watching and waiting and we have an understanding of when he would come, we won't be taken by surprise when he does come. So, but you brothers and sisters, Paul goes on to say, are not in the darkness for the day to overtake you like a thief would. And there you have it. Paul's saying that we don't have to be surprised, that we can know it's not going to come to us as a thief, because we're going to have an understanding. For you are all sons of the light and sons of the day. We are not of the night nor of the darkness. So then we must not sleep as the rest, but must stay alert and sober. For those who sleep, sleep at night, and those who get drunk are drunk at night. But since we are of the day, we must stay sober by putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and as a helmet, our hope for salvation. So we can know the day. That's, I think, what Paul is indicating here, according to the parable. And I guess that's all I got. Here's my summary of things. Each of the appointed times tells us when Messiah is going to fulfill. Are you laughing about my little flippy little
She's making
powerful
sound effects. She's whoosh.
whoosh? Yeah. So we're told when he's going to fulfill the acts of redemption, and remembering the appearing of the Almighty is something that we're instructed to do, and we're given help in understanding how we're to remember the appearing of the Almighty. The war cry of the Messiah. Actually, this sounding of the trumpet, the prophets say that when the Messiah comes, he's going to then march across the land and he's going to defeat his enemies. So the same trumpet, it seems, that is announcing his coming and signaling the regathering of his people is also a war cry, that now he's going out with his people and he's going out to defeat his enemies. We didn't get into that today, but the prophets talk about that. And finally, resurrection and gathering, those important events of a prophetic nature that are going to occur at his coming and at the sounding of this shofar, of this shout, of the Teruah. And that's Yom Teruah in a nutshell. What say you?